thank you everybody for coming to today's webinar. Like I've just said, these webinars are what we call the Smart Solution Showcase webinars, where basically we ask companies who have digital technologies that can help towns come to our webinars and give us a short presentation on what services and products they have. And then if any of the people who are in the webinar have any questions, there's time at the end to ask these questions. These webinars will also be recorded and shared through all our social media platforms on a regular basis. So, you know, if you want to share this webinar with any representative of your town who might be interested, feel free to do so. And probably a good time to introduce myself, although I think I know most of the people who are in the audience. My name's Thomas, and I'm a project manager at Maen, and I'm responsible for the Year of Smart Towns project across Wales. So this project is a Welsh Government funded project that is trying to encourage towns to start using digital technologies so that they can produce data about their towns. So hopefully that can help them make informed decisions based on data that they can collect from this technology. And I'm joined today by Damon from SENSEi Networks, who's doing a lot of work around the Internet of Things. And the Internet of Things is a very hot topic at the moment, not only all over the world, but certainly in Wales as well, and is one source of technology that can be used in towns to help make those data-driven decisions. So thank you very much for joining me today, Damon. I know you've got a presentation, a very exciting presentation to give us. So I'll stop my introduction and I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Thomas. Delighted to be here today. Thank you. Let me just pull up the presentation, and hopefully everyone can now see that.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Great, fantastic. Okay, so yeah, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining. So IoT and smart towns. Most of us have an idea what IoT is. It means different things to a lot of different people. But if I was to ask any number of people or anyone on the call today, most people will list probably one or more of the items numbered 1 to 5 on this graphic here. And for many people or organisations starting to embark on IoT, we find that for most people, this is where they will start. So think of it in terms of devices and connections and artificial intelligence and data. For me, though, it's probably more around the 6th item on this list, the human value piece. You know, as great as the wheel and the engine are, I don't own a car because of those things. I own a car because it gives me something greater than the sum of those component parts of that car. It helps me get my family from A to B quickly, cost effectively, safely, and in comfort. And that enables me to fit more into my day. It enables me to visit family that live a long way away, you know, and occasionally maybe go and have a bit of fun on a track or something. But it's the reason I say that is, if you think about a car in that sense, we don't buy a car for a car's sake. We buy a car for what the car actually delivers in our lives. And IoT is very similar. And IoT can deliver huge human value. I've sort of put on the screen here just some of the reported benefits from smart city projects around the globe, all of which really are measured in terms of human value. So there's no mentions of sensors or connectivity or artificial intelligence. This is just the number of lives saved in a year, or reduction in labour requirements, or you know, amount of water saved, improvements in customer experience and customer service delivered as a result of it, reductions in costs, increases in productivity, that kind of thing. And for me, I think really when people are looking to implement IoT, this is where they should be beginning, is what is it you want to get out of it in terms of actual value? What are you optimizing? What are you looking to save cost on, etc.? So I guess really the question is, how do you implement IoT and derive value from that implementation? Because for every success story like these ones here, there's equally as many stories, if not more, of where people have implemented IoT and it hasn't gained traction or hasn't delivered the benefits that people wanted it to. So to answer that, let me just start a little bit by telling you a little bit about our journey to where we've come from and how we've got to where we are today. I hope that there's some value in our experiences and what we've learned along that journey. So SENSEi was founded in 2015. Our work evolved from our team's experience developing black box telematic solutions for the insurance industry for monitoring driving behaviour. And our initial focus, I guess, was on what we would have referred to at the time as contextual tracking, so across people and assets. So applying what the experience in telematic development to other areas, initially with a focus on child safety, actually. But that, as we started to develop those concepts and we started to get involved in discussions with some relatively high-profile partners, including the likes of BT, Liberty Global, we were thrown a number of challenges that these organisations or their customers were experiencing. And that led us to develop a number of very interesting end-to-end IoT solutions, doing everything from tracking deceased for a very large funeral business based in London, to providing delegate tracking and wayfinding solutions for the event space, particularly a fairly high-profile event for BT, where we tracked 5,000 delegates from the minute they arrived at an exhibition to the minute they left over about 5 days. And huge amounts of insight were gained from that, through to a project in Wales actually delivering a monitoring solution to look after the personal welfare of soldiers undertaking fairly extreme training for selection exercises for the British Army in the Brecon Beacons. And after delivering a number of these projects, we started to evaluate work we've done and looked at the marketplace generally, because for all its promise and the successes we'd had with the projects we delivered, we were seeing that IoT generally was still failing to scale at the rate that all of the experts expected it to. The research giants, McKinsey, etc., were all coming out with these huge numbers of the value of IoT, but the reality was that, and there's an old adage in the industry that IoT has gone through more pilots than EasyJet, and for a long time that's been the case with IoT. It's been pilots and trials, all of which have been successful, but it just wasn't getting the adoption at scale. And around this time, McKinsey actually came out with a report, and in that report, they came out with this comment on screen now. Summary of which is just basically the challenge that organisations are facing in adopting IoT is that they're either having to adopt these sort of a number of disparate systems, or they're having to build very expensive and complex systems from the ground up. And whilst IoT is discussed as being very inexpensive, and the devices are, and the connectivity is very inexpensive, the challenge has been that this integration or this building of the solutions, because the IoT solutions involve a variety of different layers of the technology stack, and there's this sort of interoperability between these layers, they don't automatically just fit together. And so the challenge has always been, when you're building IoT solutions, you can buy the components very cheaply, but there is this six-figure sum always discussed in terms of actually integrating those things to get the solution that you want at the back end. And we looked at the market, and we saw that companies operating in the IoT space were sitting in one of two categories, broadly speaking. They were either, on the left-hand side of this, components in an IoT technology stack. So they were hardware manufacturers, or they were cloud service providers like Amazon and AWS, etc., that refer to themselves as platforms. But again, as McKinsey said in that report, platform often means nothing more than more assembly required. So they were, the components were there, and the companies were basically operating at a level, a component level of an IoT solution. And companies were having to go out and buy these individual components, so sensors, connectivity, cloud services, and then assemble their own solution. And think of it a bit like a tiered cake. And essentially these components are a layer of sponge or a layer of cream in that cake. So you go and buy all your individual layers together and then you assemble it yourself. Components are cheap, but the cost of building that cake is expensive. The other camp that organizations sit in is they are an end-to-end solution in as much as they will, you go and buy something off the shelf that has sensors, that has connectivity, that has cloud services for processing and has a nice pretty user interface on the front end that delivers some insight and benefit. But they're very focused on an individual use case. And so, as we've shown here, depicted here, they're like a single slice of cake. They are all the tiers, but they only comprise a very small portion of the overall potential of IoT. So these will be things like, a parking solution that has been delivered or a waste bin monitoring solution. These solutions exist, but they are designed to deliver functionality around a specific use case. And if you're a large enterprise organization, which is where we mainly focus to begin with, or public sector, as we're now doing a lot more work with, then you're not necessarily looking for just monitoring your traffic or just monitoring your bins. You're looking at doing a whole host of things with IoT. And the challenge that you've then got is that you are basically going and buying end-to-end solutions that will do what you want, but the data is siloed in these individual solutions. And if you actually want to get real benefit from IoT, then there is value in understanding, do the bin levels exceed a certain level when the car parking exceeds a certain level, or vice versa. And I bring that down to the most simple level. But the point I try to make is that having lots of individual solutions is great. You get the overall, you get the functionality that you need, but there is no single point where that data is then being directed to gain true insight. And again, the minute you start to get into then trying to integrate these solutions, the solutions themselves may be inexpensive, but then the integration piece is very expensive. And so that's what we found was we came to this sort of conclusion that the 2 or 3 key things preventing adoption at scale. There isn't the first one, I say 2 or 3, but the first one, which you could argue is or isn't a barrier to adoption. It's just something that we found that there was a lot of people operating in the IoT field, purely operating for technology's sake. They were interested in selling the latest sensor or gadget or acquiring that without any real idea of why. Going back to that first slide, they were caught up in the 1 to 5, but forgetting the human value element of it. I think more importantly, the 2 key ones really are the cost and complexity of building IoT solutions at scale was prohibiting any return on investment. Companies were having budgets to deploy IoT solutions that were in the tens of thousands, but the reality was it was costing them tens of thousands to run a pilot and then sort of hundreds of thousands to actually deploy a solution because they had to build it. And that was one of the problems. And then the companies were trying to overcome that issue by adopting off-the-shelf applications. But as I say, in many cases, they're adopting multiple and disparate systems across the organization, then realizing that to achieve value, they need to combine the data from these different applications, and they're then bound to go back to the integration where you're back to the cost and complexity issue. So recognizing these challenges and these barriers to adoption, we, around about 2018, pivoted our sort of approach to the business, and in response, we set about building the SENSEi IoT ecosystem that we provide today. So covering just off what that is, we refer to it as an ecosystem rather than a platform. I think platforms too commonly use the word, and like I've already said, often doesn't mean much more than more assembly required. So we refer to it, it is a platform, but we refer to it more often as an ecosystem. And it is a complete end-to-end solution, IoT solution, that enables enterprise-grade, public sector-grade, modular architecture for deploying IoT across multiple use cases simultaneously. Going back to the cake analogy, it is the whole cake, all of the layers, the whole cake. So it comprises an pre-integrated inventory of sensors across a variety of different capabilities. It's important to understand we're hardware agnostic. We work with all of the major manufacturers, device manufacturers around the globe. We've pre-integrated a substantial number of sensors that's growing all of the time, and they are around a variety of different capabilities, as you can see there, from tracking, basic tracking tags, proximity sensors, environmental, biometric, through to industry 4 type sensors for monitoring machines, etc., etc. So there's a whole host of pre-integrated sensors there available out of the box that are already integrated into the platform. In addition to that, we are agnostic, so we can integrate any additional, any new sensors as they come available, or if there is a particular customer requirement, they can easily be integrated into the system. We provide a suite of access networks to bring data into the cloud. One of the things that we found is common within the IoT market is people are very technology focused on a particular communication protocol. So if you look at the cellular operators that, you know, the likes of the O2s and the Vodafones, you know, they are focused very much on cellular connectivity, cellular IoT solutions, because that's their core business, that's where they came from. And so anything that they look to provide will be based on cellular technology, 2G, 3G, 4G, now moving into sort of LPWAN around NB-IoT or LTE-M. Equally, there's been a number of operators setting up. LoRaWAN is something that a lot of people are familiar with now. LoRaWAN's got huge benefits. And again, LoRaWAN, there's a lot of companies operating now as LoRaWAN network operators. But again, they're very focused on LoRaWAN only. And what we found from our experience of building out a number of projects is that no one solution necessarily is right. I'm not going to go into it today, but we've got a useful document that compares, for example, NB-IoT, LTE-M against LoRaWAN. And what you'll see is there isn't one technology that's better than the other. It will very much depend on what the use case is that you're trying to fulfill as to which technology best serves the purpose. And very often, you know, what will be best for one won't be best for the other. What we also find is that a lot of solutions, in order to actually meet the objectives of the solution that's required to meet customers' needs, a hybrid solution is often best. As an example of that, the work we did with the MOD incorporated Bluetooth devices that communicated with a smart hub that then communicated over LoRaWAN to gateways that were then utilising 5G connectivity or satellite connectivity, depending on where they were deployed, to communicate into the cloud. And then the connectivity on the front end was over Wi-Fi. So, you know, an example of a project that involved multiple communications being deployed within a single solution. And we found that you were either having to go out and work with a number of different parties to build a solution, which again introduces cost and complexity, or limit yourself to one technology. So we've built the platform, the ecosystem, to be entirely agnostic of technology. We work with all forms of communication protocol, and the platform actually has inbuilt its own LoRaWAN network service. And what that enables us to do is, regardless of the communication protocol that we're using, it enables us to deploy all devices on the one platform and then provide device management, firmware upgrades, network monitoring, all on a single platform. So regardless of whether we're doing waste management or personal welfare monitoring or whatever, everything is deployed in that one place and managed in that one place. And that's critically important. At the cloud level, we've got a very comprehensive technology stack that deals with the management of gateways and devices, data storage, processing, and analytics. The platform deploys the very latest security components, and as you would expect, and provides provisioning and control across every aspect of the platform. And we also have a suite of APIs and other integrations that enable us to communicate with other systems. So it's a very sort of comprehensive technology stack. And what we found is that it's kind of this 80-20 rule. What we found from having built lots of individual solutions that the majority, whilst we might be deploying the technology for a very different purpose, in one case it might be monitoring something within the funeral industry, and in another case doing something within the events industry, the 80-20 rule applied. 80% of the framework on which the solutions were built on the same technology, and then it was about 20% of the technology we were having to customize for the individual solution. So this basically is pretty much, this provides a framework that will support pretty much any application and can be adapted very easily. And then at the front end, to ease deployment, to facilitate inexpensive pilots and trials, but also to provide a framework that is scalable to a full organization-wide solution, we have something that we call Context, which is a generic user interface that supports all of the different devices that we might deploy and all the different use cases, and channels all of the information into a single interface, enabling you to support multiple applications in one environment. And that can be branded, customized, but it can also be completely rewrapped for very specific use cases or to meet an individual customer's requirements. But it essentially means that we can build something that's highly bespoke based on a template. So in terms of the costs against building something bespoke are probably about 20% of the cost of building something from the ground up. So it makes it very quick and cost effective to deploy solutions. So in summary, what that gives us is it's a modular framework that you can pick and choose pieces that you need to build a solution that is fit for your organization. We tend to think of it in terms of surfacing capabilities, and think of it in almost like a box of Lego. Lego comes in various shapes and sizes and colors of pieces, but no matter which pieces you pick out of the box, you'll be able to assemble them and they just go together with ease, and you can build whatever you want. And that's really what we've done. We surface capabilities across device types, communication protocols, across data processing and analytic capabilities, artificial intelligence, machine learning. All of these are individual capabilities that can be combined in any which way you want to build a highly customized solution that surfaces exactly the functionality you need for your environment, all under one roof. So, conscious of time, just trying to quickly sort of move on and give you some real life experience of this. Solution, this is a solution matrix. So what we find is, regardless of whether you're deploying IoT for the purposes of monitoring machinery in industry, or monitoring, I don't know, tracking farm equipment within a rural agricultural environment, or you're deploying solutions like waste bin monitoring, parking monitoring within a public sector environment, ultimately the capabilities that you require will be this. They often utilize the same sort of capabilities, and so we think of it in those terms, and then those capabilities can be surfaced can be applied to an individual sector to empower a variety of solutions. So as an example, building a perimeter security monitoring, which will incorporate a range of sensors, door contact sensors and occupancy sensors and movement sensors, etc. They might be exactly the same that would be used in a smart building solution, but in a public sector solution, it's the same sensors, but the way the data is processed, the way the data is visualized may be slightly different. And there's some example utilizations of what the platform can do, but just quickly running into some use cases very, very quickly now. These are the sorts of solutions that the platform empowers. So occupancy and footfall monitoring, we've got a range of integrated sensors that offer multiple capabilities from things down to monitoring occupancy of individual rooms, to monitoring footfall on high street, to doing spatial insight of the movement of people within retail environments, for example, and looking at how long someone spends, the movement that they make through that environment on an anonymous basis, and heat spots within that environment. So there's a whole range of capabilities that are surfaced there, and then that can be customized for other solutions. So, for example, a piece of work we recently did was developing a bespoke social distancing and contact monitoring solution for Virgin Media that goes one stage beyond just the normal piece, which then starts to look at the distance between individuals and alert if people breach social distancing guidelines, alerts if occupancy of an individual room or zone in a building goes above a certain level. So there's sort of capabilities around that. Smart building, so a range of capabilities within a smart building thing, from things like environmental monitoring, temperature, humidity, light, sound. Of particular importance right now, air quality and carbon dioxide level monitoring. The government recently announced this is something they're going to be implementing into schools. So the platform supports all of that out of the box. And that can help things like facilitating optimum working conditions, improving comfort, reducing energy consumption, bringing it back to the human value element. As hot desking and co-working increases, real-time data on desk utilisation is enabling optimisation of workplace usage, enabling people to downsize or increase size of offices appropriate to their needs, ensuring that they're not wasting cost or wasting utility consumption. Energy utility consumption, we've got a suite of sensors that enable us to monitor electricity, gas, water consumption, that can also do things like leak detection. And we're finding that there's a huge sort of drive for that around net zero. Companies, organisations and public sector organisations trying to achieve net zero. And then we've got things like location and wayfinding services, which are really designed around enhancing visitor experience. So within big public sector organised buildings, being able to guide people to where they need to go with indoor mapping, and facilitating contextually relevant engagement based on the identity or location of individuals. So the whole suite of capability around that. Flood prevention, we've got a solution that provides a rich data set that monitors things, critical indicators, things like rainfall, fill levels, to provide comprehensive insight. Dashboard provides quick status assessment of real-time weather conditions, water levels across a borough, with more detailed views by location and deep analysis of live and historical events. You can drill right down and get the notifications when fill levels of gullies and culverts, etc., exceed a certain level. And that's proven very successful in terms of preventing floods. Waste management, waste container monitoring, essentially enables you to digitise your bin infrastructure with a digital inventory of bins and containers. I mean, there's a whole suite of things around this, but I mean, asset management, identifying and recording waste assets, simplifying the tracking, and for improving operations with real-time transparency and insight. Roll-off containers, being able to track where they are, how often they've been emptied, to detect when they're being misused. Municipal and sorted waste container tracking, knowing again how often they've been emptied, monitoring fill levels, and monitoring utilisation to facilitate dynamic routing. Litter bin monitoring, particularly useful where you've got high footfall locations, being able to actually target resources to empty bins when they need it rather than on schedule-based things. And we're seeing quite a lot of damage to recycling banks and things like that. And with the technology, we can monitor things like overspill, we can monitor damage, tampering, to prevent sort of theft and damage. Parking management, so parking sensors for parking, obviously real-time parking availability, but also parking guidance systems. Electric sort of vehicle charging points is a real issue at the moment. This phenomenon known as icing, where combustion engine cars are parking in EV points. We're able to develop solutions that support, identify that situation. A whole host of capabilities around this. Technology enabled care is another area we're doing a huge amount of work in at the moment, and the platform is supporting a very comprehensive solution that is helping address some of the key challenges that councils are facing at the moment around increasing demand for care, reductions in overall funding for social care, and this is being used to prevent delayed transfer of cares, reducing those delays and reducing those costs, and supporting people living in their own home for much longer. And this solution is an example where the platform has an integration with a third party that have developed very, very comprehensive artificial intelligence that essentially learns individual behaviours, and then is continually comparing incoming data against that learned behaviour and identifying events that require intervention. And this has already been successfully used to identify as an example, somebody, it led to an early diagnosis of somebody with prostate cancer by identifying changes in toilet patterns. It's identified somebody that was having support sent in every day to get them out of bed and get them back into bed. This person was coming down and having midnight lunches all by themselves, and it completely that person has got, and now they're mobile throughout the day. So there's areas like that. So hopefully that gives you an overview of the sorts of things that the platform could do, all under one roof. Very much sort of around areas that are of interest from our experience of public sector organisations. And just to bring some of that to life in terms of how other people are using that, these are just some of the projects we're working on at the moment. That I think are probably relevant to public sector. So as I said earlier, we've done an awful lot of work in the enterprise space, but we're now starting to do a lot more with public sector organisations. So we're currently working on the project to regenerate a community park and associated recreational facilities, which will include golf course, which is implementing sensors to monitor over time the movement of those individuals, provide wayfinding around the park to support customer engagement and make it more interactive, waste bin level monitoring, as we discussed, noise and sound for to identify antisocial behaviour, those sorts of things. We're working at the moment with another organisation, just started work actually to start looking at station footfall and retail environment monitoring. So we've seen massive decline of the use of trains and obviously retail within station environments. So we're implementing a solution to actually monitor footfall, journey information, identify the behaviour of people around, all on an anonymous basis, but it provides huge insight that enables them to reshape the experience moving forward. Working with a large organisation to essentially help them on their net zero journey over the coming years, looking to implement energy consumption across a portfolio of about 3,000 properties across London. Social care product, I mentioned, we're working with a number of public sector organisations now to implement the social care side of things, all designed around keeping people in their home for longer and reducing delayed transfer of care is the main drive there. Mental health, which is a big challenge for organisations at the moment. We're currently working with a client developing a solution which is addressing children's mental health, and we're also working with an organisation that is seeking to create new insight around workplace stress and drive that down. So they're just some of the projects that we're working on at the moment and ways in which the platform can be used. I've got some other examples, but I'm mindful of time, so I'll kind of wrap up there and hand over to the floor. And if there's any questions, be very happy to answer them.
Yeah, thank you, Damon. Just to add to that, you're more than welcome to use the chat function to ask questions for Damon or for myself. I think I'll start with the first question, if you don't mind, Damon. I found it very interesting when you were saying, you know, it's there's so many use cases, singular use cases that IoT can be used for, but it's really when you start to combine these different use cases together and start to recognize patterns between various sensors. And from maybe a town perspective or a local authority perspective, it's sometimes difficult to know, okay, where might there be a relationship? What kind of things do I need to measure? And is that consultation something that SENSEi network provides?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really insightful question, Thomas. And I think, what I would say is very often, from our experience, very often you don't know something until the data suggests that you need to know it. Almost. So we found by applying sensors in different use cases, then all of a sudden, by having all of that data in one place, the system will identify trends or patterns that you never would have otherwise identified, but actually become incredibly insightful to driving efficiencies moving forward. But you would never have necessarily even thought of the question to ask it until you've got that. And that's one of the challenges we find with organisations that are adopting technology individually and disparate solutions. So, I mean, as an example, we're working with a company not actually in the UK, overseas at the moment in Italy, and they're a bit of a, this is a good example actually on a number of levels. They are, at one level, they're a housing association. At another level, they are a social care provider. And they had started to run a trial, which initially, they've got different stakeholders that have got interest in the data for different reasons. Their housing association people with facilities management are interested in it from understanding the condition of the property, how the property is being maintained, and obviously purely facilities management hats on. The care people are interested in understanding data to support, what's the environment that Doris is living in, is she using the heating, and understanding things like that. And using disparate systems, they'd have to have temperature and humidity sensors. For example, they had 2 temperature and humidity sensors in the same room, reporting data to 2 different systems. And what we're able to do is put one sensor in and then drive that data up and then process that data in 2 different ways into 2 different systems from a visualization perspective. So the relevant stakeholders get the data that's relevant to them, but that the data is then sitting in a database that when we want to run analytics and combine it with other things, it's available there as part of a wider data set. And the other things they were looking at is, okay, well, what's Doris's movements through the day? Where does she go? Does she have a fall outside? Does she? So then by bringing that in, which again, they were using yet another system to do that, they were using a Garmin watch to do that, and providing a wearable to do that piece, we're able to track her movements around. And all of a sudden, you start to build this complete insight that sort of starts to show, well, actually, if she's not had her temperature and heating on the day before, then she finds that she's unwell and doesn't move around so much during the day. But you only get that insight by having all of those things together. And that's a very basic scenario, but you can apply that to lots of different areas across, what's the impact of, this car park if there's an event over here, or what's the impact on bins in this area of town if there is an event over here. They're insights that you just wouldn't have unless you've got all of that data available in a single data set to be evaluated.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with you, and you answered my question very well there. And we had a couple of more that's come in whilst you were answering that question. You've obviously mentioned waste management and bin monitoring being one of the solutions, and I think it's quite a hot topic when it comes to IoT solutions. Bin monitoring seems to be one that's mentioned quite often, and I know in a town in the north here in Mold, they're looking at making the town a dog-friendly town, because as I think dog sales rocketed up over COVID, and more people have dogs now, and obviously want to take them into town with them. So having a dog-friendly town is important for regeneration. And a question's come in: have you ever utilised like waste management sensors to monitor dog waste bins? Is that something that you've ever come across?
It's an interesting question, actually, and to be honest, it's something that is quite close to my heart, because every time I walk my dog in a nature reserve close to where I live, and we walk around, and there are only 2 dog bins in the whole place, and every time I'm there, 9 times out of 10, they are overflowing. And it's one of those things that it kind of annoys me, because you then get the overflow, and obviously it's not a nice thing to have around. And I've noticed it does depend on what time of the week you go. So I'm guessing that these things are done on a schedule-based routine, but obviously the park's generally busier at the weekend and things like that. And I in answer to the question, I don't know whether we specifically use those sensors on a dog monitoring thing. I'd have to check within the organisation. We've used them on various different bin types, and ultimately the sensor is it could easily be used for, essentially it monitors the fill level of something, and it also can detect can also detect things like use, and so we can see how many times it's been used, etc., etc. So through a combination of those things, we could easily provide, the technology would easily be able to work on a dog litter bin in the same way it would do with any other kind of bin. But certainly it's been used successfully to identify where waste levels are increasing, and identify, it does two things. Firstly, it enables you to move away from a schedule base where you might be sending someone out to do something that's completely unnecessary because the bin doesn't need emptying. It also overcomes the problem where you've got you have got this overflow of waste, because the minute it gets full, you know it's full, so you send someone. So it gets away from the schedule based, and you can do it based on need. But it also enables you to build quite interesting data insight, even if you want to, you're not necessarily ready to move to a completely reactive model. What it does do is it provides the insight to enable you to adjust your schedules based on patterns that you learn very quickly. We tend to find within normally 6 weeks of applying technology, you've got enough data to be able to make informed data-driven decisions around changing things that will provide immediate cost savings or improved efficiencies.
Wow, 6 weeks, that's very quick. Does that depend on how much data comes in through that sensors? I assume, for example, I imagine that a city bin, you would get much more data over a 6-week period than you would out of a town bin. But on average, you reckon 6 weeks of deploying?
Absolutely. Obviously, everything comes down to the individual use case of what it is and how things done. But on average, that kind of solution, a bin level monitoring solution or something like that, I would typically around 6 to 8 weeks is sufficient time to build up a decent data set that is indicative. Obviously, it's, the longer the period of time you're monitoring over, the better, because what you sometimes find is that there will be seasonal trends as well. And so, it's not going to be exhaustive, but it certainly provides data that enables you to start to change models for the better. And then, the longer that data set is built over, then the more insight is done, and then obviously the better that you can become at making those decisions.
Yeah, and going back to one of your case studies around using IoT in a park, I know in some towns here in North Wales, there is a park that's quite central to the town, and people often go into town, go for a little walk, perhaps with their dog, and often the bins are found in the parks. So, it's sometimes having a smart town, you sometimes have to think of, okay, why do people come to the town? Do they come spend time at the park? Does it make more sense to maybe focus on an IoT pilot project in the park, understand what times of the day, what sort of days do people come to the park with their dogs? Does this mean that on hot days, these bins get filled even quicker? And just getting an understanding of the people who come into your town. I guess you have to look sometimes outside the town as well, not just on the high street.
Yeah, I think there's two things I'll just pick up on there. I think number one is, going back to that human value thing, what I would say is a lot of councils have very specific challenges, very specific to where they are located in the country. For example, recently we've just been talking to a London-based authority that had a challenge with parking in a particular park because it's got one route in, one route out. Because of COVID, there's been a lot more people around using outdoor parks, and they've had a problem where literally every weekend police are being called to police problems where traffic has just become jammed because of the way that people have been parking, things like that. There's a very specific challenge to that particular local authority, that particular park. If you look at the park we're working on in Scotland with regards to the regeneration, it's a park that has historically had a lot of facilities, but has basically gone into disrepair. No one's using it, and they want to regenerate it. It's got a lot of potential, but they recognise that to do that, they've got to go. That they need to improve experience, but they also need to monitor and understand what the challenges are. So IoT can be used for one or two things. One, it can be used to just build information that helps you understand what your issues are, and then make informed decisions about what to do to improve those. And then secondly, it can help you actually overcome specific challenges that you may have. One of the things that we have started to do more recently is provide almost like a sandbox environment for local authorities. So it's a very it's like a starter kit, but you can customize it around particular uses. It's a very inexpensive way of basically just providing a whole host of capability as a sandbox that the local authorities can just go and deploy some sensors here, there, and everywhere, and just play and learn, and then from that informs then what you want to do moving forward in terms of how IoT can help.
Yeah, and I think maybe towns in Wales are currently at that kind of piloting, playing around stage, not only through this project, but there's other initiatives that are going on in Wales at the moment that is trying to encourage towns to just trial some stuff, play around. And another question that's come up here is, other than kind of your classic bin sensors, your footfall sensors, and your air quality sensors, can you think of any other sort of use cases that might be of relevance specifically to a town centre?
I mean, there's lots. I mean, we've got, other areas I see are things like councils that have got parks or landscape gardens that they're responsible for. There's water, soil moisture monitoring, things like that. We see a lot of these areas are watered, have irrigation systems that are watering, again, based on schedules. And very often you're watering when you don't need to, and you're not watering enough when you do need to. And what we're able to do is provide soil moisture sensors that actually basically monitor the moisture of the soil, and then communicate with valves all autonomously that will then basically turn on and off irrigation based on need. And so therefore you're conserving water. Generally we're seeing sort of about 30% reductions in water over time, because you're watering based on need, and very often you're normally watering more than you need to, than not enough. So there's that sort of thing. I mean, footfall ties into other retail use cases. I'm trying to think. In areas that are prone to flooding, that's a big one at the moment we're seeing. I mean, there's all sorts. What are the other big ones?
There's as well as like particular sensors. You can use like specific sensors for not necessarily what they've been designed for, but you can sometimes think outside the box. Like for the parking sensors, yes, they're parking sensors, but now more and more people are using them to monitor, like you were saying, electrical charging point. Not necessarily, okay, is my car park full, but it can be used in a slightly different way to actually measure, is the car park, are the spaces being used by the people who they are meant for? Again, with disabled bays, it's not just, is the car park full or empty, it's, is the car park being used properly? And I think other sensors, like you were mentioning, and have been mentioned, like air quality, the footfall sensors, yes, they can be used for that purpose, but you can also use them in a slightly different way, combine them with different data sets, and then they become a whole different sensor.
Absolutely. I mean, parking is a good one that's got loads of other use cases. I mean, obviously, yes, there's parking availability, but there is on-street parking. I mean, there's different types of parking, and there's, if you take, for example, barriered car parking, it's very easy to control that very easily. You have a ticket when you go in, and you pay to get out, and so therefore it's based on the time that you're there. On-street parking, non-barrier car parking, that's a lot more difficult to police unless you've got somebody going around literally patrolling that car park, and then they've only got to miss somebody by 5 minutes, and that it throws it out. So we're finding that parking sensors are being used for introducing new control measures within parking in that sense. So we can identify almost which cars are in parking spaces. You can use it to replace expensive resource of people plodding the streets trying to find contraventions by actually using them to say, well, okay, well, this car's been parked in this bay for X amount of time. If they've now exceeded that, so again, it's very targeted. Your officer is getting a notification that there is a car in this space that's now exceeded its time threshold, and then you can start to completely switch the whole parking thing on its head. And rather than paying for parking for an hour or 2 hours, you can actually start to charge based on the time that the car is in the space. You have a local resident app that then basically they pay for their parking based on the time that their car was in that space. And that's the sort of way that we're seeing it. So there's all sorts of ways that this can go. But I mean, I think, there are other areas, and as I say, it's not necessarily related to high streets or town centres, but certainly local authority use cases. We're seeing huge amounts around social care at the moment. We're doing a huge amount of work with that, and then tying that into combining social care and clinical care and supporting that from those areas. So,
and then on that point, if following this webinar, a local authority might be interested in either a particular use case, using IoT for a particular use case, or going back to your whole cake analogy, they want the whole cake. Is it a process of getting in touch with SENSEi Network, having that initial conversation about what their needs are, and then looking into either a pilot or full-on deployment?
Absolutely. So we offer a full sort of consult. We recognise that IoT is consultative, and so we're not prescriptive in terms of, right, here's a product and this is how it's sold. We work very much on a consultative basis. We have people that will basically go in and help the customer understand what the requirements are, what their challenges are, and then basically help tailor something around that. And that will be, as I say, we offer things like sandboxes to have experimental. If you want to go down that road, first of all, we can do that. So yeah, it's very much consultative and supportive, and we stay with the customer throughout that journey. It's not like, right, we sell something and then we disappear. We're there to help scope, define, implement, support, and ensure that value is derived from that solution on an ongoing basis, and can support it as a full managed service if necessary. I just saw there was another question there about over which network do water fill sensors tend to operate for gullies and drains, etc. So I mean, we, as I said in the presentation, we're agnostic to technology, so we work with everything. But what we tend to find is water fill sensors for flood detection solutions, they'll tend to either be LoRaWAN or NB-IoT. At the moment, LoRaWAN, there is more availability of devices on LoRaWAN. LoRaWAN's been around a little bit longer. It's a slightly more mature technology. As an example, if you're looking at that sort of thing, there's around about we've got a device inventory around about 600 devices on LoRaWAN versus around 60 on NB-IoT. And NB-IoT can be slightly more expensive on an operational perspective, but they do vary, and it depends on the deployment as to which one will be best. But we typically, flood detection and bin level monitoring, same, will be deployed over either LoRaWAN or NB-IoT. And NB-IoT now there's good coverage. O2 cover half the country, not Wales, unfortunately, but Vodafone now have got 98% coverage for NB-IoT coverage across the country. So NB-IoT, there's good coverage established there. We supply the SIMs to go with those. We supply roaming SIMs, and then, as I say, LoRaWAN. I know we were talking about this before this started. There is a sort of a rollout of gateways going across LoRaWAN. We have our own server, but we also work with other parties. So we have sort of sharing arrangements whereby we can leverage existing gateway infrastructure. So if there is an existing LoRaWAN gateway infrastructure there, we can leverage that as part of the platform to support the applications. And LoRaWAN is very good for that sort of use case.
Thank you. Well, I think we've managed to answer all the questions that have come in, and yeah, I'd just like to thank you very much for presenting to us today, Damon. I know that this is a very hot topic at the moment, in Wales especially, and hopefully either people will be getting in touch with me for more information, or they'll be coming to you directly. I'll make sure to share this on all our social media accounts. And if anybody gets in touch with me, I'll make sure to let you know. I know that when I leave or finish the webinar, I'll kick everybody off, including myself and yourself, Damon. So again, I'd just like to thank you, and hopefully we'll speak in the near future.
Thanks very much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and yeah, look forward to sort of supporting anyone who's got any questions hereafter.
Right. Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr pawb. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.